In the past few years, there's been a new interest in homesteading. More and more people are interested in chickens, maybe getting a couple pigs, and growing gardens. I think that's great. I really enjoy watching off-grid homestead channels on YouTube. I don't live off the grid myself. I have an off-grid garden, but that's about it. I have a lot of appreciation for people that'll go out there and start from scratch. No power, no water infrastructure, and build it all. I think that's incredible. One homestead channel that I've been enjoying of late is called Timeline Ranch. I'd like to give that channel a shout out. Check it out. Really cool stuff. Off-grid in the Texas desert. Permaculture projects, ponds, wells, solar-powered electrical, good stuff. There's a lot of old homestead structures still out here on the southeast plains of Colorado. Here's one behind me. This was somebody's house. This was their big dream. The government gave these people 160 acres with only a few rules. You had to be 21 years of age, you had to be the head of household, and you had to stay and farm the ground. Most of these homesteads are from the early 1900s. The early 1900 homesteaders out here had a few good years. They had some wet years, but then things went back to normal. In the 30s, things dried up and their plowed up ground blew away in the Great Dust Bowl. And that was the end of homesteading out here in southeast Colorado. A few of the people stayed, but most of them packed up and left. The homesteaders' 160-acre plots of ground were bought, combined, and turned into cattle ranches, but most of it was bought back by the federal government. Today, the Forest Service manages most of that ground. It's called the Comanche National Grasslands. I thought we'd go around the ranch and just look at some of these old homesteads. They are pretty interesting. Here's an old homestead house here on the ranch. Pretty much intact. The roof's gone. You can see they built it out of stone, rocks. There wasn't a whole lot of lumber out here. Most all of these structures have a cistern underground that they use for water storage. They caught water off the roofs. Let's go inside and check it out. Here's what's left of the roof. Got a little window and a fireplace. It's a beautiful Christmas day. Let's drive around the ranch, check out a few more of these old homestead structures. Here's another homestead site on the ranch. This homestead structure was kind of a dugout. There's some old stairs leading down in here. The cistern on this old homestead site is still intact. Let's go look inside. It's in pretty good shape. You can see how they lined the walls with concrete. There's an old pipe, probably a gutter from a roof. Here's another old homestead site on the ranch. Let's walk around to see what we find. Here's what's left of their house. All the walls have fallen in. You can still make out the foundation. I don't know what this was. Maybe what's left of a cistern. If it was a cistern, it's all filled in now. Here's another cistern. It's collapsed. This old homestead had quite a few structures. And just over this hill, they had a pond. And here's their old pond. They were catching flood water from this arroyo. And here's their dam. I have seen this pond full, but it's been a long time. The rancher that was here before my family remembered this guy. He said he grew watermelons here. Now we call this the watermelon pond. Here's an old homestead site with a really interesting story. The man who lived here, he was a little boy at the time, came back to visit his old homestead. Shortly after setting up the homestead and building their house, His dad went to work in the mines of Trinidad, coal mines about 70 miles from here. My dad wrote down his whole story. Let's walk around the site, see what we find, and we'll hear the story.
August 28th, 1996. Mr. K is 85 years old and came back to visit his old family homestead today. He came to southeast Colorado in the early 1900s by wagon with his family to farm the ground. The trip took 30 plus days and was hard. When they arrived to the homestead, the family spent money on lumber to build a house. They had $3 left, so Mr. K's father was forced to leave the family for work in the Trinidad coal mines. Mr. K, his younger brother, and his mother had one milk cow, but not much else to live on. Times were tough, and one day a neighbor homesteader who disliked the family shot their milk cow. The sheriff was called, and he made the mean neighbor give Mr. K's family a cow. He also forced the man to leave his homestead and the county. Mr. K's family spent 8 years on the homestead, and they were successful growing crops. During his visit, Mr. K remembered where all his family's old buildings were and their well. Their old hand pump is still there.
Getting colder. We've had a wet winter. This arroyo has a lot of water in it. There's a homestead up here. Not much left of it, but there is an old hand-dug well. Let's see if there's any water in it. And there it is. Most of the time this old well is dry. We've had so much rain this fall and snow this winter, the groundwater in the arroyo is charged up. There's water in this well now. See some of the fossils in this limestone. I guess most of my projects in 100 years will all be gone too.
This old photo is of Mr. Haynes. The greyhound dogs were used to hunt wolves and coyotes. Mr. Haynes came to southeast Colorado from Maine in 1876. He had lost a leg in a timber accident. In 1878, Mr. Haynes settled here at Lone Tree. He built a small stone house and had 400 mares. He ranged his horses between Lone Tree and another house he built across the Purgatory River. In 1890, Mr. Haynes' father and uncle came to Lone Tree to help him build an adobe addition to his small stone house. Then in 1900, Mr. Haynes' father and uncle left for Maxwell, New Mexico, leaving Mr. Haynes to run his ranch and homestead at Lone Tree. The country was open to homesteaders, and many were moving to the area in the 1900s. Mr. Haynes sold his ranch and homestead to sheep ranchers in 1916. The property changed hands again and stayed a sheep ranch until 1950. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, the ranch changed operations to cattle. My family moved their cattle operations to Lone Tree in 1984, when I was 10.
And here's that same building in the old photograph from the 1890s. The original rock house, the little building on this side, and then on the left, the adobe house that was added on later. Here's the old adobe bricks they built this place out of. Adobe is just mud and straw. Here's the old kitchen area, some old cabinets, and the old stove. Back here behind the stove,
You can see the rocks from the old rock house. Above are mud adobe bricks. There's the rocks. 1916. This building's older than that. That's when they poured the concrete floor.
And that brings us back to my little homestead project. I don't have a whole off-grid homestead, just a little off-grid garden in the middle of a cattle ranch. We're coming up on a new year, 2025. My YouTube channel is about a year old. I'd like to thank everyone who subscribed to this little channel. Stick around for 2025. We'll see what kind of adventures and projects we can get into. Thanks a lot. And I'll see you next time at the Windmill Garden.